This is another archival upload of some of my previous mix critique videos. I apologize for the vertical format that this video is about to switch to. This is 221 to 225. This mix was sent in by Cameron. Right off the bat, it feels a little muddy. It also feels like you might be lacking some stuff in the mid-range.
When the bodies spiral high and I can't see you.
Sounds like you have a little too much going on around like the 200 to like 400 hertz range in the bass, and not really enough of that sub low end. Like it feels like, you know, everything below 100 isn't really coming through enough. That's both on the bass guitar and the kick drum. It's just, I also think the guitar is a little too loud in general. The balance of the drums to the vocals feels right, but feels like the guitar is kind of drowning out both the drums and the vocals. So maybe back down the guitar. I think your high end balance is off too. I don't think there's necessarily too much high end, but more like too much high mids. It feels like you have a lot of concentration in that like 2 to 5K range, which if there's too much going on there, things start to get jumbled because that's the presence of everything. That's where things really cut through. So if you're boosting everything in the 2 to 5K range, it starts to get a little harsh. It feels like you don't have enough in the 1K range, which is another really good cut through spot, but it's also a really important frequency range. And then it feels like above 5K, you really don't have enough going on. It feels like you're focusing on those high mids as the entirety of your high end of the track. This mix was sent in by Ryan. Okay, those drums sound really bad. Like it sounds like you almost didn't even attempt to tune the drum kit. They just sound like flat and empty. Like there's no real attack in them. That's partially because you overcompress them. You definitely have your attack set too fast on your drum compressor, but also just the drums themselves have no life to them, no pop to them. Like they just sound like, it literally sounds like you're playing cardboard boxes. Your guitar tone sounds pretty good. The bass is okay. I can't really hear it that well. I think you need a little more top end attack out of the bass. And I think you need to cut some of the low mids out of the guitar because you're getting kind of muddy there. And it's masking what the bass is doing in that frequency range. But overall, dude, the biggest problem is the drums. The drums don't sound good. I've heard a few different people mention this. And before I heard this, I never really thought about it. But after hearing it, it kind of changed my view on how to produce tracks in general. If the drums and the vocals sound really, really good, everything else can kind of sound shitty and it's still a good track. If you have a killer drum sound and a killer vocal, the guitars can sound kind of bad and it's fine. In this case, you've done the exact opposite. The guitar tone is actually pretty damn good, but the drums just sound like garbage. That's enough to kill the track. This mix was sent in by Tony.
I'm crying out for help this time. Outside looking in, and how the hell am I gonna get away with?
All right, you got a lot of nasty mid-range frequencies in the drums that definitely need to be cut out. They just sound super boxy. The guitar tone sounds really, really thin. It's definitely more noticeable because the bass is almost inaudible. If you brought the bass up and it was like gelling with the guitar the way it should, it wouldn't be as noticeable how thin the guitars sound. And the other thing is the cymbals are way too far over the top. You got a lot of harsh high-end frequencies coming out of the cymbals. You got to turn those down a little and make sure you're not boosting harsh frequencies in those too much. That at least was a really cool riff. All right, Tony, I do want to commend you for the songwriting. The mix is not great. There's some definite problems there, but I finished that whole song. Like, I really enjoyed the song itself as a whole. Like, that's a great fucking song. As far as the mix goes, you got to bring that bass up more so it melds with the guitars better, so the guitars sound a little less thin. The biggest problem is the drums. You got a lot of boomy low end in the kick that needs to be tamed a little bit, and you got a lot of really boxy mid-range frequencies in pretty much all of the drum shells. Like your drum sounds need a lot of work, and also your cymbals were way too loud and they had way too many harsh frequencies cutting through. Although honestly, man, I loved the song so much. Hit me up, let's talk about this a little bit. This mix was sent in by Dale.
I've been thinking about dying lately and gruesome scenarios, and all my friends and family concerned where my head goes.
All right, first thing is that kick is really overpowering. It's not EQ'd well, it's really boomy, and it's just way too loud compared to everything else. Vocals are also a little bit muddy and could honestly probably be compressed more.
And oh, there's no turning back. All the bullshit and the
And dude, that snare sound, you just completely obliterated the snare with compression. Like, your attack time is definitely set way too fast. You're also just crushing the shit out of it. That snare does not sound good. Honestly, overcompression is probably a big problem with the kick drum too. That's probably one of the main reasons that it's just like so boomy and overpowering, is just you've crushed it to death and then cranked the volume on it. All right, man, so honestly, the songwriting is pretty good. Like, I'm kind of enjoying the song, but just like the drums are definitely your biggest problem. Like, the vocals could use a little bit of work. Like I said, they're a little bit muddy. The rest of the instrumentation sounds mostly okay, but it's maybe a little underproduced. I probably would have added a little more to fill out some sections. But the biggest problem is the drums. Like I've mentioned before, if you get the drums and the vocals sounding incredible, the rest of the song doesn't matter. But if the drums sound like trash, like, it ruins the whole song, and that's what's going on here. This mix was sent in by Grant.
heaven sent me flowing, confiscate my
All right, honestly, the drums, the bass, and the vocals all sound really, really good. My big problem here is the guitar tone. It's really thin, it's really harsh, it's like almost piercing, and there's a lot of phase issues that might be the flanger or the chorus, whatever you added to that, but it's like, it's really noticeable. Obviously, things like flangers and choruses and phasers like do affect the phase, and they're meant to. That's part of the effect, but it doesn't sound like it fits here. All right, when we get to this heavy part, the guitar still does not sound great. It still sounds thin. It still sounds really piercing and harsh in the upper mids. And it's also way too loud compared to everything else. Like, when this heavier guitar part came in, pretty much everything else is completely drowned out.
It's artificial, they're broken, here it cracks.
Yeah, man, so overall, the drums sound pretty good, with maybe the exception of the cymbals. You kind of got some piercing, harsh high end in the cymbals as well. I would try to get some of that out and get more of the airy top end out of the cymbals. But the drums mostly sound good, the bass sounds good, the vocals sound really good. The biggest problem for me is the guitar tone. Like, you really gotta rebuild those guitars from the ground up. You also gotta work on the overall balance of the guitars compared to everything else, especially when the guitar gets heavier.